Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim daf Mem Tet. Today's daf is dedicated to the refuah shlema of Avraham Pinchas ben Yafa. Before we start today, I want to tell everyone that we're excited. We've started our Circle of Friends campaign. If you haven't seen yet, already many people have joined. I want to just encourage everybody to join the Circle of Friends. It's basically about $1 a day. If you're enjoying our shiurim and our extra programming, whether it's the weekly shiurim of other people or the skills classes, beginners classes, we're going to get all that started this year in a little bit. Already in February, we'll start with the end of January, we're going to start with another beginners class, part 2 of our beginners class from last year, of skills class, also in February, March, and we're looking forward to developing our programming. The Circle of Friends basically enables us to be able to continue our programming, run siyums. So please consider joining, and the amounts and all the different amounts can be found, and all the different currencies can be found on the site. And I want to just remind everybody, everything we do is free of charge. So you don't have to join the Circle of Friends. You can enjoy all our services for free. But the idea is to help us, to enable us to continue to have all our services free of charge. We ask you to join the Circle of Friends. Okay, we'll get started now with our new chapter, chapter 6. We're back to things that we've discussed before, and now we're going to get very detail-oriented into the language I use for my vow, what is included in this particular word, which, as we've already said many times, and even our sugya is going to get to this, that it depends sort of where you live and what language, what words you use that include, what that will include depending on where you live, when you live. Language, as we know, develops over time and changes. So that will be included in our sugya. And then we're going to get off into a lot of bizarre things today that you're going to say, really, this is in the Gemara? So here goes. Hanodir min hamivushal. If you say, I will vow not to eat things that are cooked. Okay, so anything cooked. Mutar b'tzali u'b'shaluk. You're permitted to eat roasted, because roasted is not cooked. Cooked means jello and the Gemara. We use, and this is a good example, we use cooked more generally. But in the times of the Gemara, cooked meant boiled in water. That was the idea of cooked. So therefore, roasted is okay. And shaluk. Shaluk, it's a little debatable. Usually shaluk means very cooked. And the commentaries think that's very strange, because shaluk is cooked. Very cooked, why would that not be included in cooked? So some people like some kind of overcooking something. So the Ran actually says shaluk here in this context means bashil velo bashil. It means partially cooked. And then that wouldn't necessarily be considered cooked. Amal, by the way, this might remind you of a Mishnah in Psachim, where one of the questions that they asked at the Seder, they have a different set of questions. One of them was, every night we eat meat, cooked, roasted, or tzali shaluk umevushal, exactly these 3 things, and halayla ze kulo tzali, and on this night only roasted. So there you have those same 3 together. Amal konam tavshil shani toim. As opposed to saying something cooked, you now say a tavshil, which is a cooked item. As opposed to talking about the method of cooking, it's just a bit of a different word. It's a tavshil, a cooked item. So a cooked item, the word tavshil means asul b'ma'asek derarach. It includes a cooked item that's soft. Umutar ba'aveh. I would say more liquidy, but that's the rach. And mutal, you're permitted to eat something thick. You're talking about a type of porridge. Okay, porridge, a liquidy porridge, would be considered a tavshil. A thick porridge would not be considered a tavshil. Now, why this is, we're going to see in the Gemara. I'll already kind of give it away because it's hard to read this without explaining. But Abaye is going to say something liquidy would be something you would eat with bread. And the tavshil is defined, number 1, something cooked. Number 2, as something that's normally eaten with bread. So therefore, it would have to be, and it has to be cooked thoroughly. So therefore, things that are thick, like think about eating a thick porridge with bread, it's almost too similar to bread. You usually eat things that go together that are different, not things that are very similar. So once it becomes very thick, it's kind of like bread and you wouldn't really eat it together, although maybe we'll see later that the Babylonians did. Okay? You're allowed to eat a certain type of egg and a certain type of gourd, which we're going to get to later, not today. The Gemara is going to explain what exactly are these. And seems to be the reason you're allowed to eat them is because, again, people didn't eat them with bread. If you vow from an item like cooked in a pot. So what does that include? You're only forbidden to eat something that's been boiled up. Now, okay, what is that exactly? And retachta, there's many different interpretations. A lot of these things, as we always talk about, since any of the commentaries are not living anymore in the time of the Mishnah, and they don't really understand the reality, there become multiple interpretations about what this means. Some people say it means it's cooked a lot. Some people give other interpretations to what exactly this means. Amal konam hayored liktera. All of a sudden now we get a much more general thing. Anything that will go in a pot, okay, which sounds like it's not necessarily cooked in the pot, it's not necessarily thick, thin, right? This kind of includes a lot of things. She'eni toem, that I will not eat these things. Asur b'chol hamitbashlim miktera. Still cook things, but it could be anything cooked in the pot. It doesn't matter if it's thick, thin, cooked, not cooked, right? Or lightly cooked. Sounds like it would include anything. Now we get to the Gemara, and the Gemara is going to bring already a dissenting opinion. Tanya, Rabbi Yoshaya osir. Rabbi Yoshaya forbids, what are we talking about? The first case. The first case we said mevushal, cooked, means cooked, not roasted or shaluk, which again, interpretations what exactly that means. Rabbi Yoshaya forbids the other things, okay, or at least forbids sli, we're going to see, okay, forbids roasted items. But the braita brings in Rabbi Yoshaya's name, even though I don't have a good proof, I have what we call a remez, an allusion to it in the Torah. What is that? Shenema, back to I mentioned about Pesach. Korban Pesach, we all know, was eaten roasted. So, they now notice the words. They bishlu, cooked the Pesach, which is the sacrifice, on the fire, which is roasting on the fire, kamishpat, according to the laws. So this, actually, it's a pasuk in Divrei Yomi, defining when they did the Korban Pesach. And it says that they cooked it. So what do you see here? They cooked it, but really they didn't. They roasted it. And cooking is used to include roasting. So there's Rabbi Yoshaya's proof. There you have it. So now the Gemara says, Lema b'haka miflageh. Let's assume this is the machloket between Rabbi Yoshaya and Tanakama, which is, the Rabbi Yoshaya saval halach achar lashon Torah. Rabbi Yoshaya says when it comes to vows, we've seen this machloket before, we go by what the Torah called this term. Right? It doesn't matter what people use on the street. It's what the Torah used. We go by Torah language. And that's why, since in the Torah, sali is called bishlu, therefore we say it also when it comes to vows. Vitana dilan in our Tana, in our Mishnah, who didn't say that, saval b'nedarim halach achar l'shon b'nei adam. You follow what people use on the street, and nobody calls roasted cooked anymore, so therefore it's not included. Seems like a reasonable argument, considering that Rabbi Yoshaya brought a proof from the Tanakh. To which the Gemara rejects and says, "Lo, de kule alma b'nedarim halach achar l'shon b'nei adam." Everybody thinks that when it comes to vows, you use the regular language people speak on the street. So why do they have a machloket about this? Very simply, marki atre or marki atre. Everybody went according to the place where they lived. In other words, in the place where Rabbi Yoshaya lived, in the place where the Tana of our Mishnah lived, it was different. The way they used these words was different. According, right, the Tana of our Mishnah, where he lived, they called roasted. They never called it cooked. Ula mevushal, karule mevushal, and right, cooked they call cooked, roasted they call roasted. And in the place of Rabbi Yashaya, they also called roasted cooked. To which the Gemara says, how can you say he's not relying on what it says in the Tanakh, and that it's just going by Lashon B'nei Adam? Hakran asivle, but he quoted a pasuk. Wasn't he quoting that pasuk to show it goes by the Tanakh language? To which the Gemara says, asmachta ba'alma. No, the fact that he brought a verse and he even said so, it's not really a proof. It's just an allusion, right? Hinting to this issue. So it's just an asmachta. It's just a way to remember that sometimes we call, but he was really talking about the reality where he lived. So in the end, they seem to side with, which is the way we've been siding in general, that Nedarim, which makes perfect sense, follow the jargon used by the people, because what we're trying to figure out is, what did the person who took the vow mean when they said the following word? So how can you say it goes by Torah? Well, you could, because again, you might say when a person speaks and puts together their vow. Maybe they're using the Torah language, or maybe they're using common language, and it's probably more likely they're using common language, which is why the Gemara tries to say that's not really the debate between them. They all really agree that with vows, it goes by what people on the street mean, and then it's just a matter of where you live and what they mean on the street where you're living, or in the community that you live in. And it could be based on community, it could be based on time, right? And language changes over time, it changes by location, we all know that. Konam tavshil. Now we go back to the line about a tavshil, a cooked item. I told you Abaye is going to explain to us that it has to be something eaten with bread, and that we're going to see right now. Veha mi tavshil nadal. I don't understand. Why are all these things, let's say it's thick, why is that not included? It is a cooked item. So Amar Abaye, hi Tana, the Tana of our Mishnah held, kol midi demitachel berifta tavshil kavile. Anything eaten with bread is called a tavshil. Anything not eaten with bread isn't called a tavshil. It might be cooked, but it's not called a cooked dish. The hatanya, and here's a braita to prove it. Hatanya often means, and behold, there's a braita, and it's usually a question. This is actually bringing a support. Okay, here we have that. That's what it means. Hanodil mina tavshil, asul b'chomine tavshil. Okay, that's very helpful. If you say I won't eat tavshilim, then you can't eat a tavshil. V'asul b'tzali uv'shaluk uv'muvshal. Okay, and you can't eat also. This seems to go like the other opinion, right? That you can't eat also tzali, shaluk, and muvushal, anything that's cooked, roasted, or really cooked. V'asul b'hitriot rakot. We're going to speak a lot about gourds today. You can't eat a gourd, right? It's like a pumpkin that is softly cooked. Shacholin ochlim bahem pitan, because the sick people eat those soft gourds with bread. So here you have that the criteria for what's called a tavshil is it cooked with bread? Is it eaten with bread? Sorry, not cooked. Is it eaten with bread? Now we're going to get off on a tangent because this braita said that sick people eat soft gourds. Well, the Gemara is going to have a problem with that. Ini, is that really true? Rabbi Yirmia chalash. We now have a story that seems to go against this braita. In the time of the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmia was sick. It's a very interesting story. A doctor comes to heal him. A kara is a gourd. He sees a gourd that's sitting in his house. The doctor immediately leaves. Something strange. Sees the gourd, says, I'm out of here. Why? Amal, he says, Malach mota itle l'dein bebete. The Malach HaMavet is in this house. Va'ana eo la'aseh yate, and I'm going to try to heal him. In other words, this guy's far gone. He's going to die. I'm not going to waste my time on this. He's clearly dead. How did he know he was dead? Seems like not by looking at him and his state. This would be the way you would normally think. But because there was a gourd in his house, gourds are terrible for sick people, apparently. And therefore, which is the exact opposite that we just saw in the braita, and therefore he said this guy has no hope. Okay, why? It's a little bit strange, the whole thing. Just because it was sitting in his house doesn't mean he was eating it. The whole story seems odd. Could be that it was a combination of the gourd, and maybe it was right next to his bed and he had just eaten it. Maybe he saw the remainders of the gourd and realized this guy just ate a gourd and he's definitely going to die, because gourds are terrible for people who have whatever this guy had, or sick people in general. Anyway, strange story. The main reason the Gemara brings us is because a minute ago we said in the braita that the gourds are good for sick people. And this says that gourds are bad for sick people. So how do we resolve this? We're going to have 3 answers. Lo kashya. No problem. This is not difficult. Ha berikiche, soft gourds, and haba ashune. Remember, it said you could eat soft gourds, right? And you can't eat soft gourds if you took the vow, because the soft gourds are good for sick people. So soft gourds are good, and hard gourds, it's like different types of gourds. It's a whole family of gourds, different kinds of pumpkins and squashes and all that, and different ones. I don't know exactly what they mean by soft and hard here, but different types are, some are good, some are bad. Rava bar Ula Amal, second answer, ha bekaragufe, ha begave deka. So there's the gourd itself, and then there's this center soft part of the gourd, which that part is soft. Again, it's hard to know without knowing exactly what they're referring, which kind of gourd they're referring to, but there's some soft part, and that is specifically good for the sick people, but the whole gourd itself is actually bad. The Amar of Yehuda, and here we're going to prove this and get off on a very interesting line in the Gemara. We have all sorts of interesting lines today. The Amar of Yehuda, as Rabbi Yehuda says, luliva is like from the word lev almost, the center, right? The center of things is sometimes very soft. So the center of the gourd, tekara besilka, should be eaten with beets, okay, which like the Swiss chard, the chard. So that's called silka. So that should be eaten with silka. Luliva de kitana, or actually this just might mean regular beets. Anyway, luliva de kitana bekutra. And the center of the flax should be eaten with kutach. Kutach is this famous, seemingly horrific food the Babylonians like to eat. In fact, the people in Israel made fun of them. Okay, you'll see them making fun of them today as well, not necessarily because of specifically the kutach, but we're going to see. But the kutach was this dish that was made of dry bread and spoiled milk, maybe like yogurt, and it doesn't sound so appealing. It had salt in it. It always comes up in all sorts of halachic things because it's chametz. It's got salt, which has other halachic implications. It's got milk, so it's milchik. All sorts of things about kutach, and they often ate it with other things. So they say you should eat the center of the flax seeds with the kutach. That's very healthy. Nowadays everyone's into flax seeds, right? So here you see it in the Gemara, and here comes the big line. One should not tell Amei Haaretz this secret. Okay, very strange. So we're off in a tangent right now. We're in the middle. Remember, we had this contradiction. Are gourds good for sick people? The gourds bad for sick people? We had two resolutions within the second resolution. When we talk about the center of the gourd, which is healthy, we now talk about the center of both the gourd is healthy and the center of the flax seed is healthy. Now, the center of the flax seed being healthy, we shouldn't tell the Amei Haaretz. It's a very strange line. First of all, let's define what is an Amei Haaretz. So we've talked about Amei Haaretz compared to the Chachamim or the Chavirim, right? There were the people who kept halacha and the people who didn't really keep halacha. And this sounds like a horrible line because it sounds like the rabbis are saying, this is a very healthy thing. Don't tell the Amei Haaretz, let them die if they're sick, and don't tell them the secret. Very hard to imagine that's really what the Gemara means. And therefore, there's all sorts of various interpretations given. So we'll start off with Tosfot, who has a very interesting interpretation. Tosfot, if you look at the bottom of the daf, in that teeny print, Shemal'igim aleinu. Don't tell this to the Amei Haaretz because they make fun of us. They mock us. Why are they going to use this to mock us? Ve'omrim she'anu kov'im mili dechoka v'telula b'hashas. They're going to say that we put ridiculous things in the Gemara, and they're going to make fun of us. Fascinating line, right? First of all, we know there's all sorts of things in the Gemara that are a little bit, could cause people to get a little bit upset and say, what's the Gemara talking about and why are they saying this? And in fact, it's something that we see nowadays, that people take things in the Gemara and kind of out of context or kind of mock the Gemara because of certain statements, the fact that they talk about bathrooms, which we're actually going to get to today as well, and the fact that they talk about all sorts of things and say, look, this is ridiculous. This is in the Gemara, right? So in order to protect that, the rabbis say, right, again, this is Tosfot's reading, don't tell this that the rabbis are discussing this because they're going to mock us. Okay, now whether they're going to mock us because they think it's ridiculous and they don't believe that eating the center of the flax seeds is good, or the fact that they think that the rabbis are spending their time in the Gemara talking about this, that in and of itself maybe is what they're using to mock them. So we don't know, but Tosfot is very interesting, saying, people might mock us. The Chatam Sofer has a different one. He says, and this is interesting, I see someone's talking about women in the chat, so just wait, because I think this relates a little bit to women. The Chatam Sofer says, and I think that his view of Amei Haaretz was not, in this context anyway, is not someone who's not knowledgeable in halacha. But if you look in like a translation of Amei Haaretz, you'll often find ignoramus. And he's more worried about people who aren't smart, okay? People who are, however you define what an ignoramus is. But what's the problem? If you tell them that the center of the flax seed is soft and that center is good, what might happen? They might take the whole flax seed, misunderstand because they weren't so smart, and they might eat the wrong thing and it'll be bad for them. In other words, it's actually the opposite of the simple reading. We want to protect them, okay? And therefore, we're not going to tell them in a way to protect them because they might misunderstand, which then you might say that in those days, they might have put women in that same category because women were also not so knowledgeable. Although when it comes to food, maybe women were much more knowledgeable about the men, and maybe therefore you wouldn't think that. So anyway, it's an interesting thing about how to understand why you shouldn't tell this to the Amei Haaretz, and everybody has a very different take on it. There's many more interpretations because it's a line that's very unclear what on earth we're talking about. Okay, back to our Gemara. So now we have a third answer to the fact that the braita says it's the gourds are good for sick people, and then Rabbi Yirmia's story seems to say the gourds are bad. Rava Amar Man Cholim Rabbanan. Oh, wait a minute. Sick people, the braita wasn't really talking about Rabbi Yirmia was really sick. But the braita was actually talking about Torah scholars. Torah scholars, we've seen before, they're very weak because they sit and learn all day and they're not exercising and they're not out there working physical hard labor. Therefore, right, you might think hard labor makes you weaker, but no, right? Theoretically, the hard labor might make you stronger, and these rabbis are very weak. So when it says gourds are good for sick people, it meant for the weak rabbis, not for actual sick people. If you're really sick, they're bad for you. But if you're weaker, then they're good for you. Rava l'tameh, and Rava even goes, he's consistent with what it says. If we explain it this way, the Amar Rava, turning now to Amar Bet, Kiman matzlinan al ktsire bal miriyeh. According to who do we go that in our prayer, we include prayers for sick people and weak people? Kiman ke Rabbi Yossi. We go like Rabbi Yossi. Now, okay, what are we talking about here? So if you look in Rashi or the Mefaresh, he says, Matzlina naktsire, which is when we say Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, in our davening, we pray for the sick people. And Mirei is when we say Al Pleitat Sofleihem. In Al Tzadikim, in Shmon Esrei, we say, and for the Pleitat Sofleihem, the remainder of whatever Soflim, the rabbis that are left, the knowledgeable people. So that's where we see we daven for sick people and for the rabbis, for the weak people. So now they say, Mida Amar Ktsire Miri Shma Mina Ktsire Ktsire Mamash Miri Rabbanan. So now, if we're saying Ktsire Miri, we don't just mean sick people and sick people. We must mean sick people and someone else, which must mean, right, and that's how the Mefarish gets it, that it's talking about the rabbis. I'll play Tatzafram, it's referring to that line. It must be talking about groups of sick people and groups of weaker people, which are the rabbis. I see someone quoted in the chat another interpretation, which I didn't bring. I just didn't bring them all, but yes, that they would uproot the plant before the harvest was done. They might uproot it too early. It's another thing, right? Or they might uproot them and not leave any for us. That's also. So again, there's many, many ways of reading this. Okay, umutar ba'aveh. So now we're going to talk about the Bavliim, okay, and different customs and the way people ate and how people ate and with what utensils did they eat and is it good to eat with your fingers or not. All sorts of random things we're going to get into. Umutar ba'aveh. So now it's said if you say tafshil, you can eat a thick porridge because people didn't eat thick porridge with bread. Matnitin delo kebavlai. The Mishnah doesn't follow the Bavliim, which by the way makes sense because the Mishnah was written in Israel. Why? Da'amar Rabbi Zera, as Rabbi Zera says, Bavlai tipshai. Again, we get into interesting. Sometimes they call them you stupid Babylonians. They call them that often because of the way they ate. Okay, this one also, there it came up in the context of the kutach at some point, comes up here also, to achle lachma belachma. They eat bread with bread. Okay, they basically eat their thick porridge with bread, which is basically like eating bread and bread. It's like, what kind of horrible eating habits is that? Right? That's not the way we eat. Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, we asked the residents of the city of Hutzal, which was a city in Babylonia. The Quran has a footnote about how they ate well there, and therefore they asked them about eating habits. What's the best way to eat porridge if you're going to eat it with your bread? Do you eat dechite belachma dechite, udesare belachma desare? If you're eating porridge made with wheat, do you eat it with bread made of wheat? And if you're eating porridge made of barley, do you eat it with bread made of barley? Or maybe you should cross them. Is it better to eat porridge made with barley with wheat bread made from wheat, or is it better or the reverse, porridge made with wheat with barley bread? Okay, there seems to be this idea that mixing two different type things is better, just like the soft thing with the bread, and therefore it seems to be saying, would you eat even the same type with the same type, or do you at least mix it so that you at least, if you're eating something thick with bread, at least it's of a different type, and then it goes together better. So Rava, and they don't actually have an answer to this question, which is not so surprising because it's not so important. Why they asked it is really more the question. Again, this is one of those sugya where you got to wonder, why are they talking about this, right? It's a good question. And you can see why Tosfot said, we don't want people to mock this. right? And I'm not saying we should mock it, right? I go with Tosfot that, it's not our way to come as an outsider and say, oh, the Gemara is ridiculous. You have to understand it from the inside and understand where they're coming from, even though sometimes it's a little hard to understand, but appreciate it. Rava achle b'chasise. He would eat a dish made, again, this is a little unclear what chasise means. Some people say lentil flour, some people say it's toasted flour, that he would make the flour from toasted grains, and then it was a sweet dish. Rabba bar Rav Huna eshkachel Rav Huna. So Rabba bar Rav Huna, the son of Rav Huna, his name was Rabba, he saw his father, Rav Huna, de achle daisa be'etzba'ate. He was eating porridge with his finger. There is food you eat with your finger. Porridge is a little strange to be eating with your finger, as opposed to usually the father sees the child, the parent sees the child eating with their fingers and comments. Here it's the reverse. Child sees the parent and says, Amalei, why are you eating with your fingers? Amalei, Hachi Amarav, he said, I learned it from my rabbi, Rav. He told me that daisa be'etzba'ate basim. It's tastier when you eat porridge with your finger. Again, interesting, they're talking about this. And all the more so if you use 2 fingers, and all the more so if you use 3 fingers. Okay. Amarle Rav Lechia Beret. Rav told Chia his son. Amarle Rav Huna Rabba Beret, and Rav Huna also told Rabba his son, the same 2 we were just talking about. Mizam lach lemechal daisa. If they invite you to eat porridge, ad parsa, eat it. Okay, now let's read the simple way reading. It sounds like you should walk up to a parasang of length to get there. Lamechal bisra de Torah. If someone's inviting you to eat meat of an ox, ad taltim parsa, you should walk even farther, 3 parsa to go. This seems to be saying better to eat meat than porridge. Okay, but some people explain this the exact opposite. Shita Mekubetzet says, if someone's inviting you, focusing on the inviting part, if someone's inviting you to eat porridge, don't do it. And say no, 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 even the amount of time it takes to walk up parasang. Okay, sometimes they measure time in how long it takes to walk a certain amount. So the parasang is how long you should refuse and try to not eat it. Whereas if it's of the meat of an ox, you should even refuse for longer. In there, it's the exact opposite, which is it's worse to eat meat than it is to eat porridge, because you should refuse it for a much longer period of time. So again, it's just interesting to see how people interpret things in a totally different manner. Okay, next. Don't worry, we're getting back to the fingers soon. Very interesting story, especially in light of obsession with germs and corona and all that. Amarle Rav Lechia Beret. Rav again told Chia his son. V'chein Amarle Rav Huna LeRabba Beret, and also Rav Huna told Rabba his son. You see that Rav Huna is continuing in Rav's way in all these things, right? The first one he said I learned from him, and then the second 2 were both statements that both he told his son and he told his son. Kol midayin, anything that's in your mouth. Now, often you eat and then you're left with some saliva, so sometimes you want to spit it out. Well, he says any kind of food, lo tiflot kamei rabach. If you're in front of your rabbi, it's not polite to spit in front of your rabbi. You should just swallow it. Levar min kara v'daisa, unless it's gourd or porridge, and that's why we're bringing this up, because those are the 2 dishes we were discussing. Shehem domim leptilata shalavar. They're like a lead wick, which will burn you inside, right? It will burn your intestines, and therefore, afilu kame shabor malka plo. Even if you're in front of the Persian king, he comes up a lot. He was actually one that was often beloved among the Jews. They had a good relationship with him. Even if you're in front of this very prominent king, you should even spit it out, because it's, as we call it, pikuach nefesh, right? It's very dangerous. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Here's our funny story. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda are eating from the same dish. One stuck his fingers in, and the other one used a twig, which seems like a fork. Okay, he was using a fork. The one eating with the fork said the one eating with the finger, your filthy fingernails, all the dirt is going into my food. It's disgusting. Don't eat like that. Right? You can imagine this conversation in your house. So the one eating with the fingers says to the one eating with the fork, but your fork has your saliva all over it. So you're, right, don't double dip, right? That's always what we say. You're sticking your saliva back in. You're complaining about my fingers. I'm complaining about your saliva. Now, why wouldn't the fingers have saliva on it? Some people say because your fingers you're more likely to clean off or wipe off. Whereas the fork, you're not going to wipe off in between. It's not bothering you that it's dirty. So what? So anyway, here you have a good, interesting discussion about germs and, disgust from getting someone else's germs into your food. Again, why it's here, not sure. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, sometimes you just think they want some comic relief in the middle and bring these stories just to make you smile. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, Aite lekamayu beluspian, beluspain. So Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, they brought before them, these seem to be, again, there's a bit of these are words that don't appear very often, and therefore it's unclear what they mean, possibly unripe figs. Rabbi Yehuda achil, Rabbi Shimon lo achil. So Rabbi Yehuda ate them, Rabbi Shimon said, I'm not eating those, right? They're not going to be digested. Amarle Rabbi Yehuda, my time lo achil mar. So says to Rabbi Shimon, why aren't you eating that? Amarle Rabbi Shimon, ein eli yotzim mibnei me'ayim kol ikar. These won't ever get digested. They're going to sit in my stomach and give me stomach problems. Amarle Rabbi Yehuda, koshkin shenismach alehem lemachar. He said, if they don't digest well, then better. I'll have food in my body for tomorrow. So better I should eat them. Again, what you're seeing here also is, maybe this is also part of what's going on. Different opinions, right? These are things, just like we had Nedarim alach achar l'sham b'nei adam, that food-related things are very personal. And it all depends on, forget about whether you're living in Babylonia or you're living in the time of the Mishnah or the time of the Gemara. You could be two people living in the same place, but you each have different ways of eating, different foods you like to eat, and therefore your words might mean something entirely different. Maybe that's what they're getting at with all these sugyo. Now we're going to have three stories about Rabbi Yehuda and why he had a ruddy, healthy complexion. He was red in the face, and three different characters. We're going to have a rabbi. It sounds like a joke almost. A rabbi, a Roman matron, like a woman, one of these women who always starts up with the rabbis, and a heretic, also always start up with the rabbis, right, for different reasons. So each are going to basically ask him in a different way, why do you have a ruddy complexion? Rabbi Yehuda v'yativ kamei to Rabbi Tarfon. So first he's in front of Rabbi Tarfon. Amarle Rabbi Tarfon, hayom panechat tzubin. Your face is all ready today. What's going on? Amarle emesh yatzu avadecha lasadeh ve'eviu lanu tchadim v'achanum below melech. Okay, yesterday the servants went out into the fields and they brought us chard and we ate it without salt. We ate it without salt, and that already made our cheeks ruddy. If we would have been it with salt, it would have been even more. Okay, and basically saying it's just the food I ate. So now we got this Roman matron woman says to him, More v'raveh, you're a teacher and you're drunk. His face was all red. She assumed he had drunk a lot. Amar hey manuta v'yada. Okay, I'm going to put my faith, my trust in you. In other words, you should trust me. That I promise that I never ate ella, I never drank other than kiddush v'avdalta v'arba kasei pischa. The only wine I ever drink is kiddush, havdalah, and 4 cups of wine. Okay, not only that, and I have a massive headache from Pesach till Shavuot because of the 4 cups of wine that I drink. And that's all. I can't tolerate wine at all. That's not why my face is ready. It's my wisdom that causes me to look the way I look. Okay, that's what's bringing me ha'arat panim, as we say, a beautiful expression. So, first of all, there's a very interesting source, because what does it seem to say? It has halachic ramifications. It means that if you can't tolerate 4 cups of wine on Pesach, you have to eat them. You have to drink them anyway. There's no way out of it. You can't say, I don't like wine, and the whole idea of 4 cups is so I feel like a free person and I'm in a good place. Even if it takes you to a bad place, it seems like you still have to drink them. And this actually seems to be quoted, la halacha, in terms of the 4 cups. I mean, again, you can drink grape juice, there are ways around it, but you have to actually drink the 4 cups. You can't say, oh, I'm not drinking 4 cups of wine because it makes me uncomfortable. Here comes the heretic. Your face looks like the people who loan on interest and the people who breed pigs. Okay, those seem to be jobs that make a lot of money and are very easy jobs. He says, no way, no how, I don't do this. Jewish people can't do either of those things. Ella, what's the reason? There's 24 toilets on the way from my walk from home to the Beit Midrash. And every hour I go into each one of these. Okay, either this is a totally ridiculous retort and he's just saying, leave me alone. Okay, and it's his way of just avoiding the question. Or what he's saying is, I don't have issues of constipation, and that's why my face is ready because I use the bathroom very well. Okay, the Ben Yehoyada makes a nice idea about these three different people who come to him and the way they answer, the way they question him. Right. So if you notice the matron brings up wine because the Romans drank a lot of wine. They were into fine dining and all that. The heretic brings up sin because that's what the heretic is doing, right? They left religion. He also says, I have to just recall, let me just look for a minute. If I can find it quickly. Right. Also, the way he answers them is different, right? So Rabbi Tarfon, right. So first of all, Rabbi Tarfon saw it as a more positive thing, whereas the other two also saw it negative, he says. And then, right, he says to his own teacher, he spoke with humility. He didn't say it's because of chokhmat, because of my wisdom. He said in a very humble manner, oh, it's just what I ate yesterday. And with the matronita, right, he says, according to the Ben Yehoyada, that Stuki, he's mocking because he's saying you're just a heretic. I'm not really answering you. And the matronita, right, he basically just said, I don't drink at all. Like, don't call me a drunk. It's clear that I don't drink. And he tried to prove it by saying how sick he gets. So each one got a different kind of answer because each one also asked from a bit of a different place. Okay, next, more about Rabbi Yehuda. By the way, because of this toilet issue, so Shuli Mishkin this week in Flashback wrote all about ancient toilets. So you can go read about it. It's a good article that gives you a little bit of a background about, what does it mean there were toilets along the way and what kind of toilets did they use and what was the progression historically of the toilet. Okay, next. Rabbi Yehuda Azil Lebei Midrasha Shakil Gufa al Kitve. Another story that seems, again, a bit unrelated. He would take a jug with him on his shoulders to the Beit Midrash. Amar Gedola Malacha Shemechabedet et Ba'aleha. He says, great is the work that ends up bringing respect to the one who does the work. Okay, meaning what? He schlepped this very heavy thing to the Beit Midrash. I assume we're talking about this because we were talking about him going to the Beit Midrash. So we would schlep this heavy thing on the way to the Beit Midrash, this jug, so that when he got to the Beit Midrash, he wouldn't have to sit on the floor. He'd be able to sit on something. Interesting to think about, right? To think about what their toilets look like, right? What their Beit Midrash look like. There weren't rows, tables, chairs. Okay, it seemed like he had to bring his own thing to sit on. Rabbi Shimon shakal tzana al kafe. He would take a basket on his shoulder. Amar gdola melacha shemechabedet et ba'aleh. And he also said, great is work that it brings respect to the one who does it. This statement in and of itself is a whole question because this seems to be saying it's good for rabbis to be working, right, and not to be not doing work. Now, there's a bit of a problem with that. First of all, Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he is famous in saying that if you're studying, you shouldn't be working. And here he says specifically, work is good. So first of all, Yafi Clymer, Rabbanit Yafi Clymer, in this week's Machshava Shniya in the Hebrew part of our website, has a shiur about this idea of what's that balance between working and learning, which is a fascinating topic that is covered in many sources. And there's sides, lekan or lekan. Here, there seems to be a contradiction, Rabbi Shimon himself. And the question is, first of all, what's the problem with, there's all these things about, there's a Gemara in Kiddushin that basically says, I'll read it to you. It says, you can't do malacha in public. Now, these rabbis were schlepping these big, heavy things in public. So how could they do that? So the question is, what's really the problem of, who is this, by the way, who really can't? Is it someone who's like the head of a city, maybe, not necessarily every Talmid Chacham, and why they couldn't do it? There's different approaches. Is it they can't do it because it shows that if they're, right, like imagine you're on the street and there's a big famous person, let's say a big rabbi, Rabbanit, or someone that you want to show respect to, and you see them doing something, carrying something really heavy, you're going to say, oh, I should be doing that for you. So if they're carrying it themselves, it's like embarrassing. What? There was no one else who was going to do it for them. So it's a humiliation to the people. Or possibly it's that if they're doing work with the people, then they become part of the amcha, like part of everybody else. And then people don't have the respect for them, right? You think about the army and this whole idea of distance, right? Distance from your superior. And when you do the same work as everybody else, you're not distanced anymore from your superiors. And you want people to have that respect for rabbis. Otherwise, they won't listen to what they have to say. So there's a bunch more other reasons about how they did this. And yes, it goes back to what we were talking earlier, that the Talmidei definitely weren't carrying things and they were weaker. So that's also a question. Again, different ones in different times, and this isn't indicative of everybody. Okay, last story for today. Debitu de Rabbi Yehuda Nafka. So the wife of Rabbi Yehuda would go out, when she would go out, naked amr, she would take this wool, av de glima de hutfe, she would make this nice cloak. There's a debate about whether it was nice for her, but it wasn't really nice because we're going to see that they were pretty poor. Okay, this is kind of showing the poverty that Rabbi Yehuda was in. When she would go out to the shuk, she would use it to cover herself. When he would go out to daven, he would use that same cloak and cover himself up. Some of the commentators talk about this in the context of kli gever, kli isha, right? That a man can't wear something in his woman's clothes, a woman can't wear something in his man's clothes. So this seems to show that unisex clothing is okay, right? If it could go for him or her, because they wore the same clothing. Anyway, he was so, it wasn't even a coat, but he would say, Baruch, bracha you probably never heard, that God wrapped me in a coat. Even though it wasn't really a coat, it was a cloak, it wasn't the same thing, but for him, it was so important because that was all he had that he was always making a bracha. We're only going to get to the beginning of the story. One day, Shimon Gamliel said we have to have a fast and have prayers. Rabbi Yehuda lo ati Beit Midrash. He didn't come to the place where they were praying. Amrin le lo ile kisuye. They said he must not be coming because he's embarrassed. He doesn't have anything to wear, to cover himself with. Now, why doesn't he have anything to cover himself? Either it was before she made this cloak, or she was using it that day and he couldn't use it, right? It's unclear. It's unclear what exactly the connection is to the first part and the second part, but they both show that he was very poor. Shadur le glima, they tried to bring him a cloak and say, wear this cloak, velo kabil, and he wasn't willing to wear it. And he didn't want to take their charity. So to hear the rest of the story, you'll have to wait till tomorrow. We'll start tomorrow's class with the rest of the continuation and figure out what happened. Did he eventually go or not? And was he willing to take it? What exactly happened? We'll see. Even possibly some miracles can happen. So with that, we'll finish for today. And, again, lots of food for thought, lots of lines in the Gemara that can be interpreted in multiple ways. So if you want to spend more time researching, reading commentaries, I welcome you to do that and spend some time thinking about why Gemara decided to go in depth into all these things. It's a good question, but do it with care and caution and not the way Tosfot warns about those who are maligim and make fun. Have a great day, everybody.